What is up, guys? Tony Picks here with another upload. It's been a while, but I've been pretty busy, so let's get right into this prediction video. We're going to be doing the main card for UFC Fight Night Dos Anjos versus Edwards in San Antonio. Let's get right into it. Kicking off the card, we got Arlovski squaring off with Ben Rothwell. It's a rematch. Arlovski won the first matchup via KO. I see this fight playing out on the feet. Arlovski with the edge and stand-up technicality, output, and stamina. Ben Rothwell having the edge and power and grappling. He may elect to grapple, although I do think Arlovski's got the better offensive wrestling. Ben Rothwell's a better just grappler in terms of grinding him up against the fence and landing some shots. Toss-up matchup because both these guys are on their way out, especially with Rothwell coming back from the USADA suspension. Hasn't looked nearly as good as he had in the past. Arlovski coming off some tough decisions. I'm going to be leaning to Arlovski in this matchup based off of his technicality advantage on the feet. I think he's going to be able to land the better shots and have the better output throughout 3 rounds versus Ben Rothwell. So with that being said, I'm going to lock in Arlovski via decision. I think the output and the stamina is going to play a factor in this matchup. Moving on to the next match, we got Alexander the Great Hernandez squaring off against Francisco Trinaldo. Pretty interesting matchup. Hernandez coming off of an interesting loss to Cerrone. I think he's really learned from the fight. Just off of hearing him in podcasts and interviews, he really is still confident in himself, so I don't think he's going to be gun-shy in terms of throwing the big shots, but I think now he's aware that he's not going to be able to finish every fight early, so I think that makes him a more dangerous fighter than he was before. Francisco Trinaldo, how old is this guy? It's like 40-something or some shit. Fucking still tough as fuck, crazy good stand-up fighter. Really good kickboxing. I just really think Alexander Hernandez has the edge in terms of just sheer strength. Obviously, Trinaldo, the more technical Muay Thai based fighter. I just think Hernandez here is going to press a pace and pressure Trinaldo. I think he's going to land some big shots with his hands, getting close inside of boxing range, land the takedown and beat up Francisco Trinaldo. I think it's going to be a unanimous decision win for Alexander Hernandez. Moving on to the next match. Interesting matchup between James Vick and Dan Hooker. A lot of videos I've been watching are leaning towards Hooker. I do give Hooker the edge in terms of boxing. And definitely has a better chin. We've seen him take some big shots against Edson Barbosa. Really, just was hanging on off sheer toughness. James Vick coming off of a tough loss of Paul Felder. Really interesting matchup if you watch the full fight of James Vick versus Paul Felder. I was 1-1 going into the 3rd round, and I really think Paul Felder was able to edge out the stand up in terms of that fight with Vick. So interesting to see James Vick coming off of 2 losses. Hooker coming off of that loss to Edson Barbosa. I think the X factor here for me is the fact that Dan Hooker is fighting a taller fighter, not used to fighting a taller fighter, and I think the way he fights, he really uses his range well, keeps his hands low and kind of throws jabs and kicks. A decent pressure fighter, but I don't think he's the type of pressure fighter to put James Vick's back against the fence, and I think that's where Vick's most susceptible is when his back's against the fence, because his head movement is non-existent. It's just like a lean back, kind of puts his head back, and that works when you're 6'3". Obviously, people can't reach, but when your back's against the fence, like we've seen against Gaethje, it's not going to work because there's nowhere to go. And I think against a fighter like Dan Hooker, James Vick's going to be able to avoid having his back against the fence, and I really think he's going to be able to fight at his pace, kind of a point-style fight, and I really think he's going to be able to land the crisper shots because Dan Hooker fights with his hands super low. If you watch him against Barbosa, just fights with his hands really low, like kind of a karate stance, and moves forward. Although he does have a great chin, I don't think he's going to be finished. I think in terms of volume and landing the better shots, I think James Vick's going to be able to edge out Dan Hooker. Cardio, both of these guys have iffy gas tanks, but I think James Vick has the better gas tank against his fight against Paul Felder. Showed he had a decent gas tank, not the best. There was some decent grappling exchanges in there. But Hooker completely gassed against Barbosa after the second round, which is obviously respectable. He's taking some big body shots, but still questionable. Both these guys have a big cut, obviously being 6'3" and 6 foot. Yeah, very evenly matched fight. But I'm going to lock in my decision with James Vick via decision. I really think fighting styles make matchups, and this is better for James Vick in terms of not fighting a guy who's going to smash his head off and charge right forward at him and just press him into the cage. I think it's going to be a tight, evenly contested matchup, but Dan Hooker's not the type of guy, like I said, that's going to push him into the cage, land a big shot, and put him to sleep. He's more of the volume guy, lure you in, and I think that James Vick, coming off of 2 losses, is going to want to get a smart win, just kind of a boring point fight, but land the bigger shot. So I'm locking in my decision victory with James Vick here. Moving on to the next matchup, heavyweight battle between Greg the piece of shit Hardy and Juan the Kraken Adams. You guys already know I'm going to be going for Juan Adams. I think he's 5-1. I don't think he won that last matchup against Arjun Singh Pular. But yeah, this can be a stand-up matchup. I don't really care too much about Greg Hardy, to be honest. Once again, on the main card, because Greg Hardy's obviously generating volume, making some noise because of his domestic abuse case and because it was in the NFL. I think Juan Adams uses his 1-inch reach, jabs Craig Hardy's face off, and wins via KO in the first round. Moving on to the next matchup, the co-main event of the evening. Interesting matchup, the classic striker versus grappler. Only the X factor here is the grappler is old as hell and very fragile, whereas Walt Harris is young, learning, training at a good camp. And a lot of people that I listen to their breakdowns and their predictions are leaning heavy on the fact that Walt Harris got submitted by Verdum quick. I think I'm not going to say he's on another level than Oleinik, but I think that Verdum, in terms of technicality, is fucking a solid jiu-jitsu practitioner, and a lot more traditional in terms of his submissions, whereas Oleinik catches you with like weird shit that he drills, but not like traditional stuff. And it was just like a late notice fight for Walt Harris. I think Walt Harris is going to come in and land the big shots early on Oleinik. I think Oleinik broke a rib last fight against Overeem, ate some knees. Overeem was able to stuff the takedowns and really showed that Oleinik just kind of throws random heavy shots. I just think Walt Harris is going to come in and just land the big shots and put Oleinik out early in the first. So I'm locking in Walt Harris via KO in the first round. Moving on to the main event of the evening. By the way, guys, I'm trying to drill this video in like under 10-15 minutes. Super busy, but trying to get some videos out there and just get predictions out there. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this main event here. 5-round fight. Leon Rocky Edwards, Rafael Dos Anjos. Interesting to me that Rafael Dos Anjos is the underdog here, considering the fact that he's had a lot more main event slots, a lot more 5-round fights. Fought in the stiffer competition in his last 5 fights. He's fought in the likes of Robbie Lawler, Kamaru Usman, Kobe Covington, coming off of a big win of Kevin Lee. Obviously, Ian Edwards coming off of a big win, too, of Gunnar Nelson. But what's interesting to me here is I think X factor here is Rafael Dos Anjos, his ability to submit people on the ground late, his jiu-jitsu is something that people sleep on, and we've seen that against a strong fighter like Kevin Lee. In terms of stand-up, I got to give the technicality edge to Rafael Dos Anjos, a lot better kickboxer, mixing in the kicks a lot better. Leon Edwards, if you look at his record, man, he hasn't really fought studs. Like, he hasn't fought a standout fighter that really like steps out, that's a crazy contender or anything like that, although he is a solid fighter himself. I really think this is a step up for Leon Edwards, and something that's interesting for me, if you watched the end of the fight against Gunnar Nelson when he was on his back, Leon Edwards literally just clamped on for life. I believe it was the last minute, or could have been less, but just held on to, I don't think Leon Edwards has a decent ground game off of his back whatsoever. what I like about Edwards is how different he is in the clinch. When he's in the clinch, he goes for kind of like a crossbody grab, and he's really good at landing body, like knees to the body. He's really good at landing knees to the body, and I think that's huge in this fight where it's a 5-round fight, and those knees will wear on a fighter, especially like Rafael dos Anjos, who is susceptible to being grappled. It's not like he throws at range and shots to keep you away. We've seen wrestlers have the ability. We've seen that kind of be his like kryptonite, so to speak. We've seen wrestlers have the ability to pressure him, wet blanket him, and I think that's because his fighting style isn't really like a where he throws a lot of teep kicks or straight kicks to keep you away. He throws a lot of power shots and a lot of looping shots, not really straight shots to keep you away. Although he does mix in the kicks well. So I think the grappling exchanges are going to be interesting, uh, so to speak. What I think is interesting to me, and what's going to play a huge factor, is when it gets to the ground, Rafael dos Anjos, if he gets on top of Edwards, I think it's going to be danger. I think that's going to be something that exposes Edwards. I think Dos Anjos' ability to land strikes from the top, to force his opponents into submissions, and just to wear on his opponents over the course of rounds, just to withstand their initial charge, like we've seen against Kevin Lee. Kevin Lee came out really strong. First, mid second, but Dos Anjos, man, stuck in there, pressed, got to the ground, got that arm triangle, and just showed, man, the guy's still there. We've seen him come off some losses, but he's still very impressive. So with that being said, guys, I'm going to lock in the 4th round submission to Rafael dos Anjos. I think it's going to start off standing off. I think the exchanges are going to wear on Leon Edwards, and I think getting taken into deep waters and not having his opponents fall to his shots and cater to his fight style. They're having Rafael dos Anjos is going to make it dirty. Dos Anjos is going to chew up that leg a bit too. The fight's going to get to the ground. Dos Anjos is going to get him in a submission. 4th round. Rafael dos Anjos via submission. All right, guys. Enjoy.